Very good morning to you, Rakib. Nice to see you back in the studios here. Have you got any news for us on what you're sacrificing to save the planet?
I'll be honest, Mike. I read the Lewis Hamilton's thoughts on the whole, how he's become an environmental hero. I think it's an absolute load of nonsense.
Well, it's good that he sold his plane, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
But he's still got the fleet of Bugattis. Never mind. Let's talk about British jihadis, because there's story in the Times today suggesting that the government might be about to change their mind, because we've had Sajid Javid and Priti Patel both saying that as far as they're concerned, anyone who went to fight for ISIS is not welcome back in this country.
Conflicting messages, aren't we?
Exactly right. Dominic Raab, new Foreign Secretary, is now saying because of what's happening there now, because of the violence unleashed by Donald Trump pulling American troops out, Turkish forces fighting in northern Syria, we now believe there's an awful lot of these people on the loose, right?
Well, I think for me, Dominic Raab, I think he struck the wrong tone, if I'm being completely honest. There is absolutely no public appetite at all for the repatriation of ISIS fighters, for them to return to British soil at all. I think in the last time I was here, we discussed the possibility of Western countries having developing some sort of collaborative effort to set up an international tribunal in the region,
which would be far more sensible.
Which I think is far more sensible. Apparently, there's a UN source saying that the chances of that taking place are minimal. But that's where we need our elected representatives to take a firm stance and say this is the option that we want to go with, and adopt a robust position on that.
Is there no reason why, or any reason why, they can't take them just to the regular War Crimes Tribunal in The Hague? Because I mean, there's no question, I don't think in my mind, that many of these people will have committed war crimes.
I think for me, our politicians need to explore those sorts of options as opposed to even talking about the possible repatriation of ISIS fighters. We already have people who have returned from those territories on British soil. So we need to closely monitor that situation. The last thing we should be doing is adding the numbers.
One of the things that Dominic Raab says that they're looking in particular in relation to orphans and unaccompanied minors who bear UK nationality and whether they can be provided safe passage to return. Now, I don't know whether he's talking about bringing the children back but not their parents, or whether he's talking about going into the very dangerous part now of northern Syria to bring these kids out.
I think we need to make the point that the situation there has significantly worsened from a security perspective. Any discussion of the possible retrieval of such children, there needs to be some serious risk assessments in terms of, putting our own personnel there, the people that we give the responsibility for that task. And we need to make sure that, they are well protected themselves.
Yeah, well, exactly right. And also, I'm not even sure, one, whether we know where any of these people are, because we're told that we've all seen the footage of them running out of this, what we thought was some kind of detention camp. And also, we really don't know how many children we're talking about, do we?
I think another point that we have to make is that there's discussions with the extended family members of such children. Well, I'd like to think that there's some strong background checks on those extended relatives, because we have to bear in mind that these, some are orphans, and some of these children, they are the children of parents who left the United Kingdom to join a barbaric cult, a bloodthirsty terrorist organisation in the form of Islamic State. So I really feel that our elected representatives, they have to take a very careful approach on this particular issue.
Funnily enough, the UK so far has been generally quite quiet about what's happening in that part of the world, hasn't it? I mean, the Americans have said that they're not in favour now of Turkey and the kind of military might that they're using in northern Syria. They've asked them to have an immediate ceasefire. I haven't really heard much coming out of the British government about it.
I think in terms of the British government's thoughts on President Trump's withdrawal of US troops, which I thought was a bonkers decision.
Crazy,
absolutely bonkers decision.
Well, especially to having then done it, to then say, oh, it's a bad idea for the Turks to go into northern Syria. Well, what do you think was going to happen?
I think, firstly, from a moral perspective, I thought it was a disastrous decision. The Kurdish fighters out there have done much of the donkey work in terms of defeating Islamic State. But also from a strategic American perspective, their presence there acted as an important check on Turkish and Iranian expansionism. Right. So from a moral and strategic perspective, I have to really question President Trump's decision to withdraw his own troops there.
I think everyone is united in that kind of condemnation. I don't think I've heard anyone say it was a good idea. And quite why he thought it would be a good idea is beyond, I think, the wit of almost anybody. But in terms of the way that things are going there, I mean, the Turks, when they talk about that sort of safe corridor, the clean corridor that they want to have, they kind of make some sense as far as the terrorists that they're fighting are concerned. I watched an interview just the other night on Channel 4 News with a former foreign minister who said that in Turkey, it's not that we're against the Kurds. There are lots of Kurds who live in Turkey quite peacefully and quite happily. But what we're not keen on is having this access geographically for people who wish to do us harm. And you can kind of see their point there, can't you?
I think for me, we have to be careful when it comes to adopting a positive attitude towards Turkey, because the reality of the matter is, and I think this is the really, this is the really important point to make, when it comes to these Turkish Islamist militiamen, they have a fair bit of common ground that they share with these Islamic State fighters.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that we have to be really careful of.
Okay. And there is a worry about that as well from the point of view of where these Islamic State fighters go, because a lot of people seem to be concerned that they will go into Turkey and therefore gain access to Europe. And, of course, we have no guarantee that any of them have been de-radicalised on the basis that we think that they might do us harm.
Well, I think my thoughts on de-radicalisation is pretty well established. I think that there's a shared appetite amongst Western countries to, in my view, I think the best option would be to set up that international tribunal in the region. Because the reality of the matter is, where we're talking about, Western European countries or the United States, there isn't that appetite there for repatriation. They do not want people who joined an organisation which is ultimately focused on introducing a global Islamic caliphate and to destroy Western civilization. They do not want them back. That is the truth.
Right. And what is the kind of atmosphere back in, say, this country or in other countries of Europe? Because we know, for example, from Shamima Begum's case, that her husband was not from Britain. He was from the Netherlands.
Dutch, yeah.
Yeah. And I think he's gone back there to go to jail in Holland. And she's been offered the opportunity to go back to Holland and being sort of jailed with him, as it were. What's the situation with the radicalisation of young men and women, perhaps, in this country? Because we know from her experience that she was more or less radicalised on the internet, decided it would be a great idea to go out there. Is that still going on? Or is because there's nowhere for them to go specifically, is it stopped?
I think, firstly, focusing on Shamima Begum in particular, we've had all sorts of defences for her. Almost like this victim framing of Shamima Begum. Oh, she was groomed. Oh, she was only 15 years of age when she left the UK for Islamic State. I'll make this point again. I think that's deeply disrespectful towards, British Muslim girls who all they're focused on is, working hard, doing well at school, doing the best they can for their families. So that sort of, the victim framing narratives for Shamima Begum, the real victims here when we're talking about Islamic State are the people who have been, brutally murdered by Islamic State, the Yazidi women who've been raped and turned into sex slaves by Islamic State. These are the real victims here. And I think that point needs to be made even more strongly.
Yeah. And as far as the people asking for the repatriation of these people, I mean, there are quite a few former cabinet ministers, including David Davis, saying that, these people do represent an imminent threat now because of the change in circumstances in northern Syria. So surely we should be rounding them up. But the trouble is, that's quite a big exercise.
Would he like them in his neighbourhood?
Well, I mean, I don't know. This is the point. I mean, I don't think he wants them back with a view to living in his neighbourhood, but I think he wants them back with a view to putting them on trial here.
Well, my position is very clear. I don't want them anywhere near British soil.
Right.
So the reality is, for me, I feel that the best option is to set up that international tribunal in collaboration with other Western countries, because I just feel that the public appetite for that sort of arrangement, even for them to stand trial in the United Kingdom, I don't think there's much public support for that. And I think that our elected representatives should pay more attention to general public opinion on these sorts of issues.
Right. Interestingly enough, today we got Priti Patel as well saying that she's getting into a new collaboration with France, which will prevent quite so many people coming over across the channel, basically illegally. I'm not quite sure how that's going to work yet, but that seems to be a view that they've kind of strengthened as well, given where some of these people are coming from. I
think that direction is far more positive than the sort of the sort of thoughts that Dominic Raab has been expressing on the issue.
Right.
But I think it's important there that the government develops a coherent position on these sorts of matters. And at the moment, there is a degree of conflicting messaging on these sorts of matters.
Well, there is,
which isn't helpful at all.
And a conflicting sort of series of pieces of information, because there were 3 kids, I think, found in northern Syria. They've now been taken by the UN to Raqqa, which was the final sort of stronghold of ISIS before they were defeated. And basically, they're believed to have travelled to Syria with their parents from London 5 years ago. The UN is trying to trace their relatives in Britain, but they don't know their surname. And so, you know, it's a real can of worms.
It's a really messy situation. And I think that's why we need our government.
Imagine taking your children to northern Syria to fight for ISIS. I mean, it beggars belief. And I understand that people say, well, the children always have to be treated.
And imagine the fact that these were British citizens doing that as well.
I know.
It's scary.
I mean, there really isn't a kind of societal rule for this, is it? I mean, it's so far off base and so unimaginable that you would do something like that.
I think
there's no remedy for it.
Absolutely. I think one thing that, you know, based on what's happened here, I think one thing that would be a step in the right direction would be the modernisation of treason laws. Because I think there's been a shifting change in terms of what is our, you know, who are our ideological enemy.
Yeah.
So I would like to see a modernisation of treason laws, and hopefully the government would move into that direction.
And I wonder whether the government has even considered your idea of a sort of international court of some kind for trials of this nature, because maybe you should talk to somebody about that.
Well, I think that, according to a UN source, there's the idea that this is just, it has no legs, this idea. But I think that this is something that the British government, in collaboration with other Western governments, they need to really run with this idea. Because as I said, even we're floating the possibility of such people being repatriated and then standing trial in the UK. The reality of the matter is there is just very little public appetite for them to be anywhere near the UK.
I think that's absolutely right. Rakib, thanks very much indeed. Rakib Ehsan there, research fellow from the Centre on Radicalisation and Terrorism at the Henry Jackson Society. It seems to be an insurmountable and unsolvable problem, this. Nobody wants to see the children suffering, but I don't know if you want to see them being brought back either. It's very bizarre, isn't it?